Hi, everybody. Today's Friday, July 18th, 2025. And our friend Larry Johnson is back with us. Welcome back, Larry.
Yeah, I was trying to make you cry before we went on air about your shirt, but no, you wouldn't. You said, I want the focus on you. So what a
You're
gentleman.
shining right now.
What a gentleman you are.
I'm on the margins.
So what are we talking about today?
Yeah.
Anything going on? Anything happening?
He's just so calm.
Oh, yeah. We're bored.
Larry, I want to start with hearing what we've learned from the Israeli media, the Times of Israel. They're talking about how Yemenis were capable of somehow shutting down the Eilat port in Israel.
Yeah.
And it seems that next week they're going to shut down the port, that it's so much important because the only Red Sea port for Israel. And looking at the way that somehow Yemen, nobody's talking about Yemen. And because we have a lot to talk about.
They can't fix it. I mean, there's, the United States and Israel have found out that they're impotent to subject the Yemenis, particularly the Houthis, that bring them under their heel. I mean, this is really a remarkable story, and the people of Yemen are doing something historic. They have stood up and gone toe to toe militarily with what some would argue is at least the strongest naval and aviation power in the world. I wouldn't necessarily say that the U.S. is the strongest military power, but in terms of naval force, it's at the top, and in terms of the multitude of aircraft. And we failed, despite Trump's claim, oh, they capitulated. Well, please. And, Israel's gone in and bombed them. And then they keep lobbing missiles back into Ben Gurion Airport and other places. I think if the Houthis really got serious or could get some additional assistance from outside, they could really put a hurt on Israel. But here, look, they forced Israel to shut a port because nobody is using it. Because they couldn't get there because they get blown out of the water if they dared to get in the Red Sea. Oh, just an amazing story, really, and a credit to the people of Yemen.
Larry, the attitude of Yemenis is somehow amazing because they're somehow capable of absorb all of these difficulties and hit back. And the patience, this sort of this ability that I've just mentioned is somehow making them so much difficult to deal with. I think one of the main difficulties that the United States had during the conflict, 7 days, 10 days that the United States went to the Red Sea to go against them. This was the main issue, wasn't it?
What do you mean this is the main issue? I'm not sure I follow.
Because they were witnessing that Yemen doesn't care about the way that they're hitting them, because they're gonna respond without. They don't show the pain that they're feeling. I'm talking.
Okay, yeah. They don't let the pain and suffering force them to surrender, because I'm sure they weep. They definitely weep for the loss of life of their fellow citizens. And but they don't curl up into a fetal position and say, "Oh my God, we got to surrender. We can't endure this." They've really demonstrated a level of courage and tenacity that is, it's sort of reminiscent of. To bring up ancient history of the 300 Spartans that stood against the hordes of Persians or Babylonians coming in. They, on paper, there was no way they could have done this. They're just because they're small, they're economically, weak, but there's something to be said for the courage of these people. and what they have demonstrated. They have, and it's not for a selfish cause. They sit there and say, look, these Zionists are murdering these Palestinians and women and children every day, day after day. Somebody's got to do something, and they stood up to do something. Meanwhile, well, actually, I guess there is some good news that's coming out of Bogota, Colombia, that a group of 12 nations, including China, have met there to, they're going to start as a whole imposing sanctions on Israel now to try to force Israel into a ceasefire and to, stop the killing and allow humanitarian aid in. I hope I hope they follow through on it. So if they do that, then the Houthis in Yemen, they're no longer alone. But it is, it's a credit to the Houthis that their particular religious faith, there's some people that talk it and some people that live it, and they're living it and willing to say, if we die, we die, but we die serving God.
Larry, what is happening in Syria? And we know that a lot of talks. Israel is attacking Damascus. Al-Jolani seems that I don't know, he's not there. He's not in Damascus. He's in Turkey. I don't know, somewhere else. Idlib. Nobody knows where he is. It seems that most probably in Turkey. But what's happening? Druze and together with Israelis are fighting Al-Jolani.
Yeah.
How can we, before going to that, here is what Marco Rubio said yesterday.
Obviously, these are historic, long-time rivalries between different groups in the south-west of Syria, Bedouins, the Druze community, and it led to an unfortunate situation and a misunderstanding, it looks like, between the Israeli side and the Syrian side. So we've been engaged with them all morning long and all night long with both sides, and we think we're on our way towards a real de-escalation and then hopefully get back on track in helping Syria build a country and arriving at a situation there in the Middle East is far more stable. So in the next few hours, we hope to see some real progress to end what you've been seeing over the last couple hours.
It doesn't seem that the United States and Israel are on the same page in Syria.
What was your first clue? I mean, he said Syria. It looks like the Syria and Israel have had a misunderstanding. Oh, is that what you call dropping a 1,000-pound bomb on their defense headquarters? Yeah, that's just a misunderstanding. God help us if they have an angry disagreement. What will that entail? Look, I don't pretend to be, an expert on Syria, but just, when number one, it is an ethnic mess. You've got the Druze in the south. The Druze, they're sort of Muslim. They're not Muslim. They're sort of Christian. They're not Christian. They're the Druze, and historically they've been a closed community. They're not keen on, the boy bringing home, hey mom, look at this Christian girl I just met. We're going to get married. And parents would freak, they marry within. The problem with the Druze is the communities are on both the Syrian side and they're in Israel. And the Israelis historically have treated the Druze differently. They've been allowed into the Israeli army. You've even had some Druze commanders rise to command positions in the Israeli army. So I think they're generally viewed as sort of allies of Israel. However, some in the Druze community, particularly younger folks, are starting to identify more as Palestinian than as Israeli. But anyway, you've got that conglomerate there. Then you've got the Bedouin tribes. And I'm not sure what the mixture is there between Shia and Sunni. Then you have the Alawites. The Alawites are a version of Shi, at least a connection there. You have a small Christian community still left in Syria. And then you have the Kurds out in the eastern part. Well, so there is no national Syrian identity. The tribal identities, I think, supersede that national identity. And then you've got these outside interlopers. Well, Shara comes from, yes, he does come originally from Syria, and now formerly known as Al-Jalani. But the West has clearly thrown its support behind a group that was previously identified as a terrorist organization because of its attacks on civilians. I do draw a distinction. People, you get a lot of the Zionists that get their shorts in a knot over the Hezbollah attacked the Marines in Beirut back in '83. Well, I'm not saying that I'm glad that they attacked the Marines. Heavens no. And they killed 247. But they're military. They carry weapons. The fact that the Marines that day chose not to have their weapons loaded, that's on them. The support that was alleged to be provided by Iran to the Shia militia in Iraq during the war, the U.S. invasion, the illegal invasion, in my view. Again, that's military. That's not civilian. They're not blowing up civilian aircraft. They're not running in doing suicide bombings in a cafe. But Jalani and his outfit were killing civilians. And they continue to kill Christians as well as Alawites and Shi. And this has, the newfound unity in Iran in the aftermath of the Israeli Pearl Harbor that was unleashed on them. It brought about a unity as well as an anger at Israel. So there is, you got to sit there and say, what's the foundation for peace? Well, frankly, I don't see it. What's curious is how Turkey's ability to influence and control events there seems to have weakened, not strengthened. And these things are spinning out of control because the people that get killed by these Israeli airstrikes, they're not going to just let us say, oh, well, never mind. They're going to seek revenge. So Israel's not buying itself any goodwill in the region, that's for sure.
When it comes to the current phase of the conflict in Ukraine, Larry, we know that before going there, let me ask something about Iran. It seems that the United States is trying to negotiate, is trying to somehow send signals to Iran that they want to negotiate with Iranians, but the Iranian supreme leader said that he didn't give the permission to the government to talk with the United States. We've learned from Ali Larijani, one of the important figures in Iran, who's so close to the supreme leader of Iran.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in that front between the United States and Iran?
Well, the Iranian negotiating position, I think, became clearer yesterday. There was representing the foreign ministry that spoke to Press TV. And one of my contacts at Press TV forwarded that to me. And, Iran saying, okay, if we're going to talk, let's get some things straight. Number one, if we're going to be open to inspection and international oversight, then Israel has to as well. And because we're not going to get into an agreement where you inspect us, but nobody inspects Israel. No. Israel's got to be subjected to the same requirements that you're levying on us. Very fair, absolutely, in my view. They said then, Israel's got to pay for the damage they've done to us because they struck us. We didn't strike them; they struck us. And then we're going to need ironclad guarantees from the United States that if you're going to enter into a negotiation process, then you're not going to authorize any kinds of attacks on us. And if you can't agree to those conditions, then we're gonna be at war. Was essentially the message. And that's I published that last night at sonar21.com. That means that I think going forward, Iran's going to prepare for the next round of being attacked. I do not see, Iran's not going to launch any preemptive strike on anyone. They're going to hold back. They will respond though if attacked, and they will respond with even greater force than they did the last time. And now they don't have to worry about bombing the port at Eilat because it's closed down. So it's I think Iran realized it got played for a fool. It trusted the United States that they were involved in a legitimate diplomatic process, and instead of honoring the negotiations, the United States used that as a subterfuge to try to decapitate Iran's leadership and destroy the country.
It seems that Iran is getting so much close to China and Russia in terms of air defense systems. Yeah. Larry, your opinion on the air defense system? Do we have any information on the Chinese air defense system? Because
I don't. They keep talking that Iran is getting the Chinese air defense system. I think the only recent case where we've actually seen it operate in a combat environment was in Pakistan. And I'm not sure how effective it was. Apparently, it shot down some French-made jets. I guess India was flying French-made jets that and the Pakistanis have Chinese. The only country where you've got a proven air defense system that works to take down both ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones is Russia. I don't know what the Iranians are thinking. I know what if I was in the decision-making position, I'd be going with Russia, not China, because Chinese equipment, as far as I'm concerned, is just not battle tested. It may look good on paper, but can it actually perform the job? Whereas the Russian system is they're fending off multiple drone attacks, and they defeated the ATACMS missile, the Storm Shadow missile. So they've proven that the Russian equipment can get the job done.
The priority, Larry, in your opinion, is for Iranian air defense system is to hit the fighter jets or to hit the missiles coming from fighter jets?
Yes, about all of the above. All of the above.
Which one is more easier for Iran to do, in your opinion?
To shoot down the jets, the fixed wing aircraft. Hitting the cruise missiles can be a more challenging target, but it's smaller. But that's what you've got. You correctly note that systems like the Patriot, those are designed to hit aircraft, not ballistic missiles. And as has been proven over and over again in both Ukraine and in Israel, they suck. The Patriot sucks at dealing with missiles, and even having trouble with the Iran drone. But that's where Russia has a clear advantage in having not just the S-300, S-400, S-500. They've got the Pantsir system. So they have a layered air defense system that can deal with a variety of threats. That's ultimately what Iran needs.
Here is, Larry, what Maria Zakharova yesterday said, that Moscow considers itself entitled to use weapons against military targets of countries that allow Kiev to strike deep into Russia with their weapons. It seems that there's what is the recent advancements, the recent changes that has happened in the region, that there's so much concern about Russia getting hit by these missiles, I don't know, that coming from the United States or maybe Germany or United Kingdom?
Well, there's been the talk, and I want to emphasize talk as opposed to action, about sending long-range missiles. When the word came out, I guess last week, that the United States was considering giving Tomahawk cruise missiles to Kiev, that was a red line right there. Because the problem with the Tomahawk is it can be equipped with a nuclear warhead. Well, when it's fired, it doesn't turn a particular, if it's carrying a nuclear warhead, it turns red. If it's carrying conventional, it turns green. No, there's no way to know what's on it. So as a Russian military planner, you have to assume they're shooting a nuke at us. Zakharova's warning, I'll call it a subtle warning to the West, is that if the Germans decide to provide a Taurus missile, then targets in Germany will be hit by Russia. And they can do it very easily with your Oreshnik missile. The same is for any other country. But here's the problem these countries have. Neither France nor England nor Germany are sitting on major stockpiles of long-range missiles that you could funnel in there to try to change the strategic picture. And in fact, the Germans, despite what Merz says, all the other Germans are like, "Oh, wait a minute, there, cowboy. We're not going to go. We're not going to go do that. We're not going to, widen this war." France is facing, a real economic crisis. So, the last thing it needs is to, deepen that crisis by getting into a shooting war with Russia. So, but the Russians are reacting to what the West has been saying. And they're making it, they're publicly reacting just to say, hey, you can't keep threatening us like this and think that we're not going to respond, because we will. You're notified. You're on notice.
Who's buying the weapons from the United States? It seems that it was Germany and the United Kingdom, but what Donald Trump is offering, what he's talking about, it seems that the scale is broader. Here is what he said, Larry.
From what countries?
Coming in from Germany and then replaced by Germany, and in all cases, the United States gets paid back in full.
Have you started?
What's happening, as you know, is the European Union, if you look, mostly European unions, but let's put it in the form of NATO. It's very similar. But NATO is going to pay us back for everything. In some cases, we're going to be paid back by countries of the European Union.
And it's so amazing that he says NATO gonna pay us back. And NATO, it's not part of NATO.
Who's the largest presence in NATO? Who provides most of the money in NATO? Oh, that'd be the United States. So, like I said, Donald Trump is a used car salesman. Hey, just hop into this vehicle. It's only been driven once a week for the last 5 years by this little old lady, and she just drove a mile to the store and back. So, and then you find out it was used in an attempt to drive around the world. And it'd been through deserts and jungles. Please, Trump. They're at dinner. You got the Germans, the French, the Brits, the Italians, the Dutch. Trump sitting there, and he said, man, I'm glad we all came to dinner, that you all got to pick up the tab." And Italy goes, "I'm not paying." And the friend said, "Yeah, neither are we." Boy, oh, I left my wallet in the car, and all of a sudden, this plan that NATO's going to, all these NATO countries are going to come up with a bunch of money to give to the United States for weapons that they haven't yet produced, and maybe a year or two away from producing. It's just this is delusional nonsense. But they do have the other possibility of steal the money that has been confiscated from Russian accounts and use that to send to the United States. But
I think they're counting on this money a lot. At least Europeans, they may consider to pay the United States for the weapons by the Russian assets.
Yeah, but again, it's not even clear what weapons are we talking about. What's the shopping list? Are you talking strictly Patriot missile batteries? Are you talking Storm Shadows or HIMARS? Are you talking new M777 artillery units? What's on the menu? They've been very, very vague about that. And so, but again, Ukraine's problem is not that, oh boy, man, we've got the best fighting force in the world. We've got guys that are trained and ready to go. They don't have equipment. Please give them a rifle, give them a hand grenade so we can go fight. That's not the problem. They don't have the manpower or the trained manpower. They keep press ganging bodies, and they had a videos gone viral the other day of the Ukrainian recruiters go to some guy's door and drag him out of his house, and his attack dog, this little corgi, the kind of dog that Queen Elizabeth used to have this pack of these little rugrat dogs, comes out and barking and jumping around, doesn't save his master. That's why I have 2 Rottweilers. Okay. They're 135 pounds each. They'll drag your ass into the water, But the point is, Ukraine doesn't have the manpower, and with each passing day, that deficit is growing. It's not increasing. And we saw it the other day when they did you talked about this with Andrei Martyanov yesterday, I think, that here's the exchange of bodies. The Russians get 19 cadavers back, and they turn over 1,000 Ukrainian bodies. That it is lopsided. Some would say, well, that's just because Russia's advancing and Ukraine can. Yeah, that's the point. Russia's advancing. Ukraine is retreating. Ukraine is not moving into territory that they've taken from Russians and collecting Russian bodies that way. But I looking at the kind of tactics that Russia is using, they're being cautious to avoid, human wave assaults. They don't see any value in that. Their military commanders have gotten much smarter about their tactics over time.
Larry, there was a conference in Germany, in Wiesbaden, Germany, and they were the American general Christopher Donahue. He said that Kaliningrad, Russia, is roughly 47 miles wide and surrounded by NATO on all sides, and the army and its allies now have the capability to take down from the ground in a time frame that is unheard of and faster than we've ever been able to do. What is this guy talking about? It's somehow you hear these things. If I were in Russia, sitting there, it's somehow frightening the way that they're talking about these things.
Yeah,
Madness.
I don't want to make it personal, but to say something like that, it reflects a profound ignorance, a lack of strategic understanding, that if he thinks that NATO could launch an attack like that on Russian territory, it would unleash a nuclear war. Well, actually, Russia has an option. They don't have to go nuclear. What they would do is that's why they're building up the Oreshniks. And those Oreshniks would be unleashed on every major military facility, U.S., German, French, British, and the West would suffer devastating consequences. And then they'd be faced with, okay, you ready to go nuclear? I mean, this is so reckless and irresponsible. But the war fever that has infected the West, it's like a congenital condition. It's one that we can't seem to shake. I don't know what he was thinking in saying that, why he would say something so provocative. But again, the Russians take it into, okay, we hear you. We've got this is not like some lowly private or corporal, sitting at at some beer house in Berlin or Wiesbaden or München, just spouting off, because he's had too many beers and yeah, man, we're gonna go get those Russians a what for, No, this is a senior military official that is talking openly about, let me show what we can do to Kinenrad. Good God.
If it was a Russian general talking about this toward the United States, I would assume it was on all over the mainstream media, even the Congress, Ted Cruz coming out, we have to do a preemptive attack on Russia, Lindsey Graham. But go ahead.
Well, I just say I haven't monitored Russian media to see what the politicians are saying, but I would suspect they're going to have the same kind of reaction you're describing.
Yeah. Because we don't know that much about the Russian media. We don't have at least here in Brazil, we don't have access to the Russian media. What we get from RT, Russia Today, and TASS, and all we get from Russia. Do you get from somewhere else, Larry?
Well, yeah, you can go on the Telegram channels and get some of it. But yeah, that's the other, it's an interesting point that you make about the suppression of information out of Russia in order to basically deceive the people in the West so that they don't understand really how normal Russia is and how much, it reflects what I would call traditional Western values, not this current freak show we've got going on over here that is rampant, unfortunately. But, the Russians sort of, I guess guys keep asking themselves, well, why is it that they hate us? I mean, that was basically what Putin said in that interview he did last Sunday with Pavel Zarubin. That he said, look, after the Cold War, we thought that the major difference that was separating us from the West was the communist versus capitalist ideology. He didn't use those precise terms, but that's what he meant. And he thought, now once the West comes in and says, hey, the Russians they're promoting free markets, open markets, capitalism, private property, Christianity, that they're strongly nationalists. They take pride, like Americans get all misty-eyed when they see Lee Greenwood's song, I'm proud to be an American. Everybody's gets all emotional. Well, the Russians do the same thing. I am Russian. In fact, with even greater passion. And so they thought, hey, we can get along here. Oh, no. And what Putin discovered was the West has no interest at all in dealing with us as people. They see us only as an object to be consumed, destroyed, broken up. And I think Russia's finally awakened to that threat. That until something radically changes in the West, Russia's going to have to stay on its guard and be ready to go to war.
And it doesn't seem that could happen anytime soon.
Right.
There is Germany and the United Kingdom signed a military pact, citing that Russia, in this military pact, signing Russia as a strategic threat. I don't know how Russia is threatening them, and they fight in Russia in Ukraine. They started the fight, but somehow they're trying to then reverse the picture, just change the picture for all of us.
Yeah, one of the advantages we have today with social media that go back 100, let's say 110 years. So 1915. Well, then the media was newspapers and magazines. And the stories they could tell would convince people that, why the Russians needed to be defeated, or the Germans, or, whoever. And they're able to manipulate the opinion, particularly of 18, 19-year-old boys, and they would charge off the war because the war was touted as something that was for national survival. They were lied to. I mean, World War I was a completely unnecessary war. And World War II was just an outgrowth of what was the seed sown in World War I. Well, now today, here's Germany and France. Oh, yeah, Russia's a strategic threat. Well, kids can get on Instagram. They can get on, Facebook. They can get on X, Twitter, and say, oh, wait a second. There's other information out there. I think while it's still efforts underway to manipulate and control public opinion, it does get to be a little more difficult with the social media realm, as long as it's not under full control. And we're seeing that right now a little bit with this whole what I call the Epstein inferno. Donald Trump has set the whole Epstein story on fire because he's tried to deny and pretend there's nothing to see here. Move along. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. And the more he says that, the more people go, wait a second. Well, if you don't want me to look at that, there must be something I must look at. And so the information is starting to get, it's getting a level of attention that it hasn't received in the last 20 years. And it's exposing some great things. So that's, the same thing applies to this. What France and Germany signing a mutual defense pact? I thought you already had one. It was called NATO. So you're basically conceding that NATO is useless? I do.
It's the United Kingdom and Germany, Larry.
The United Kingdom as well. Yeah, God.
It's between the United Kingdom and Germany. France is not part of the deal.
Oh, France is not part. Okay.
Actually, they have announced, even with the case of weapons that the Europeans are buying from the United States, France said they're not going to pay for that.
Okay. The French and the Italians, hey, man, we're not picking up that check. Nope, forget about it. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. That's why I was somehow surprised that Donald Trump was offering that NATO is paying us. It seems that all the countries in Europe is paying the United States when he says NATO, because it seems that he doesn't consider the United States part of NATO. That was somehow...
Yeah. We're paying ourselves. That's how that works.
When it comes, Larry, to Germany and the United Kingdom, if you were to evaluate the power they have to, without the United States, to go against Russia militarily, do they have the armament? Do they have the manpower? Do they have any sort of plan to I don't know, to go against Russia? Because you see politically they're somehow putting some sort of statements out to against Russia, but militarily, is there anything happening in these two countries?
No, nothing significant. I mean, basically, both of their militaries are incompetent. They lack manpower. I think Britain's army right now is below 70,000. All right, you can put them in. You can put them into a football stadium in Rio or in London or wherever, and there'd still be 20, 30,000 seats left. Russia's army is 1.5 million. And the same with the Germans. And there were reports, about a year or two ago that even in the German army, they didn't have enough rifles to put in the hands of soldiers. So, it's like if you say, I want to buy a Lamborghini, what is it, $250,000 car? But my job is I serve hamburgers at McDonald's and I make $17 an hour. And I still have to pay rent and I have to pay on my existing automobile, but I'm going to buy that Lamborghini. Okay, what's your plan? Show me how you're going to come up with $250,000 to buy it. Well, that's what Germany and England are right now. They're working as hamburger servers at a restaurant, and there's nothing wrong or demeaning. If that's where you're working, that's fine. God bless you for at least being willing to work, but don't convince yourself that you've got billionaire bucks in your pockets when you don't. And that's the kind of disconnect you're getting here with the UK and with Germany. They can thump their chest and make all the threats they want against Russia. But Russia's sitting there, as I said, with 1.5 million soldiers under arms. And more importantly, they are combat proven and tested. They haven't just been out on a training ground. They have been fighting, and it is a very dynamic war in terms of they continue to change tactics as they go along. They continue to incorporate new tactics. UK and Germany aren't doing that. Whatever personnel they have sent into Ukraine to assist the Ukrainians, a lot of them have been killed. So they're not bringing back any of their experience.
The head of the chief of the British General Staff, Radican. He went to Ukraine to talk with Syrskyi. What he has, the United Kingdom has to offer to Ukraine at this phase of the combat, at this point that the Ukrainian army is experiencing, whatever the situation that they're experiencing on the battlefield. What are they trying to do with that? How much help can they provide Ukraine with, in your opinion?
Are we going to show me what he said or not?
Yeah, he said the operational situation at the front and the critical needs of the defense forces of Ukraine are on the agenda. Syrskyi said after the meeting, he said that it's all about providing Ukraine with weapons. And
if you're sitting in a wheelchair and you're paralyzed from the waist down, and I buy you a pair of running shoes, track shoes, and other things that you could use if you could actually walk, what good is it? You're in the wheelchair. You ain't getting up. So, and that's the situation Ukraine is in. Yeah, give them the weapon systems. If you can, but you probably have to send some of your personnel in to operate it because or at least train them. But so far, we've seen several instances in which the trainers that have gone in are getting killed alongside the Ukrainians. There's a video channel called Borzikman, Borzikman, that does a pretty good job of reporting on a lot of this. It doesn't make its way into the media, but it is, I think it is generally reliable information. So, this isn't, I could see, again, what are they going to do offensively? If Germany and the UK, the first step would be they would have to mobilize their personnel. They would have to train them, get them trained to a particular level, and then they'd have to deploy and move them forward. Well, that's not going to happen in 24 or 36 hours. I did used to, when I was scripting military exercises for the Special Operations Forces, those Special Operations Forces are designed to be alerted. Hey, we've got, houses on fire, like the firemen being called out. So they rapidly mobilize and they get their gear loaded onto a plane, and then they fly off to get to a location to carry out an operation. But those are small units. They don't make any difference on a big battlefield. And the UK and Germany, what they're talking about is a conventional capability that, frankly, they don't have. It exists on paper, but when it comes time to put it into motion, it ends up being ineffective.
Yeah. Have you heard about this program in Ukraine, Test in Ukraine? It's called Test in Ukraine. It's a program under which companies would send their products to Ukraine, give some online training to how to use them, and waiting for the report coming from Ukrainians and the way that they're using it. It's somehow amazing, Larry, because when you talk about the war, because you have to have an army who is trained, who knows how to use the weapons, the integration of those weapons into the army, the combination, the coordination among the various parts of the army. But somehow it seems that Ukrainians came to this point that they somehow trying to do everything, throw everything at Russia, just to keep going with the conflict, with the war.
Do you remember, was it a punk rock group, Crash Test Dummies? Do you remember that group? And do you know what a crash test dummy is? It's these mannequins that are put into automobiles, and then they drive into a brick wall and say, well, how broken up did that mannequin get? Well, that's all. They've turned Ukraine into the crash test dummy state. Only instead of mannequins, you're putting real men into these vehicles and just running them into a brick wall, saying, yeah, that seems to have hurt. Oh, we don't want to do that. That looks pretty lethal, And if the Ukrainians are dumb enough to continue to put up with this, they probably deserve to be exterminated.
They're forced to go there, Larry. They're just capturing people on the street and sending them. They don't have anything to. Nobody's. What's so tragic when you look at Ukraine, and nobody's defending those people in Ukraine who are not willing to go to the battlefield, who don't want the war in Ukraine, but nobody's hearing them. Nobody's talking about it.
One of the things that helped bring it into the Vietnam War was that enough people finally went to the streets to say, no, we're not. This is wrong. And that's what's going to take in Ukraine. The Ukrainian people themselves have to stand up against Zelensky and his corrupt group of cronies. But as long as they acquiesce and stay silent and don't protest, okay, they continue to be the crash test dummies. And like I said, if that's their attitude, if they're going to go quietly into that dark night, if they're just going to, march into the execution chamber without, raising any objection, yeah, then they probably, just from a Darwinian standpoint, it's good to get rid of them. You don't want that genetic material floating around the human genome. It's obscene, and to see what the West, just how callous the West is. Yeah, we don't care if they die. It's just, they're a bunch of, just a bunch of Ukrainians. They're not real people. I mean, it's disgusting.
Here is, Larry, what White House said about the 50 days that Donald Trump, the deadline that Donald Trump is talking about on Russia.
The president clearly laid out, if there is not a ceasefire agreement or a peace deal within that time frame, if Russia refuses to legitimately agree to a ceasefire, then they will face very steep tariffs, and they will also face secondary sanctions. So countries that are purchasing oil from Russia will be sanctioned as well, and of course that will do deep damage to Russia's economy. And I would just add that the president wants this war to end with a diplomatic solution. He's been pushing for it. This administration has spent many hours and a lot of time trying to solve this war very far.
Maria Zakharova yesterday said that the administration in Ukraine is not willing to talk about the next round of talks between Ukraine and Russia. And how can you put these two pictures together?
Well, Carolyn Levitt, she's just a kid, and not well informed on these matters, and like a good propagandist, saying what she's been told to say. I had one of my readers at sonar21.com provide an interesting analysis of where the 50-day came from. That 50-day mark falls around September 2nd, September 3rd. Gee, what's happening on that date? Oh, Vladimir Putin's going to be meeting with Xi Jinping. So maybe what Trump's saying is timing it to the coordination between Russia and China. The stupidity of Trump's policy, where he says, "Oh, we're going to levy tariffs on Russia." Well, the only thing, my understanding is about the only products that the United States is still importing, or the only thing that the U.S. is importing from Russia, are nitrogen for fertilizer and uranium for nuclear power. So if the price of that, if you're going to put tariffs on that, it means there's going to be more money. Those who are doing the importing are going to have to raise the prices of that. So that means the price of fertilizer will go up. Well, who does that hurt? Well, that hurts U.S. farmers. And if the price of uranium goes up, that hurts consumers of electricity. I guess there are a few of those in the United States. Russia is, not going to be cowed by this. The reality is, Trump has no leverage over Russia, and Russia has made it very clear what its position is. That you get the recognition of the oblasts that have voted to become part of the Russian Federation, to return to the Russian Federation, and international recognition of the Crimea as being part of Russia, that an end to NATO involvement in Ukraine, complete end, and a cessation of provision of military equipment and intelligence, as well as the presence of military advisors in Ukraine, then we can have peace. Otherwise, Putin hasn't said it this way, but we're going to beat the living hell out of the Ukrainians and out of NATO. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it. That's where this is headed. So, Trump and his deadlines, just, he needs to stop talking. Remember in February, he was bragging after he did his tariff announcement. All these countries are lining up to kiss my ass. That was his words. I haven't seen a lot of ass kissing going on over the last 4 months. And all these trade deals that people were lining up, couldn't wait to make the trade deals. That's not happening. I saw what Lula said yesterday, with respect to Donald Trump. He was not impressed with Trump's threats. Just the opposite, basically, gringo, you're not going to come tell me what to do.
Gringo, you know that.
Yeah. I mean, right. He used the word gringo, right?
Yeah. Everybody's coming from outside. It's coming from other countries. They call it gringo here in Brazil.
Gringo. Yeah.
It seems that you're a foreigner. You're not from Brazil. But Larry, what Lula said, he said that Trump was elected to be the president of the United States, not the emperor of the world.
Yeah.
The way that he's behaving, it seems that but when you look at the bigger picture, Larry, with what has happened with South Africans officials, the officials of South Africa, and right now with Brazil, it's an attack on BRICS. It's not related to the specifics of the differences between the two countries. It's something bigger than that.
Yeah. No, this is Trump is taking the exact wrong tack in trying to derail BRICS. The more he attacks, even countries like, Brazil in particular, because, I thought, following the Kazan BRICS summit last year, and, Pepe and you have talked about it, Pepe and I have talked about it, that there was concern that Brazil was going to get a little soft, like not be as enthusiastic about it, not make it a priority. And I had sort of anticipated that the BRICS summit there in Rio was going to be a bit of a bust. Turned out it wasn't. And part of that is attributed to the fact that the aggressiveness and antagonism by the United States towards the BRICS countries, coupled with the other, the support for the attack on Iran, the continued efforts to escalate in Ukraine, the threats against China, it's bringing everybody together that are the targets of the United States anger, and they recognize, hey, we got a lot more. We can work together on this. I mean, Cuba and Venezuela for years have been targets of this U.S. bullying. And now all of a sudden, you're finding that they're saying, we're going to fight, we're going to hang together. And it's made, actually Brazil now is probably a much stronger supporter of BRICS. I would even venture to say, even if Bolsonaro came back in, despite his closeness with Trump, would be hard. He would be, I think, creating a real political problem for himself if he tried to separate from BRICS, because Brazil is now starting to benefit financially from the BRICS relationship as trade has shifted. The trade that the United States used to do with China is now China's redirecting that and doing it with Brazil. And, Brazilian farmers are making more money. Brazilian manufacturers are making more money. So it's these people, they're going to try to isolate the United States if they can. That's where this is headed. And, Trump's doing a hell of a job on that front. Just people are like, what's wrong with this guy?
Can we say that China somehow is less shy and less timid toward the way that they're thinking, they're shaping their foreign policy? They said 2 days ago that they're totally in for support for the support that they're giving to Russia in the fight against Ukraine and the West. What's going on? Because if you remember when the conflict in Ukraine started, they were not that much willing to talk about it to the way that they were supporting Russia, and right now they're just saying it as it is.
Well, the context in which they said it was the EU foreign minister, or Kaya Kallas, who is supposed to be the European Union's version of a foreign minister, showed up in China with a 37-page document. Now, normally in traditional diplomatic, I guess, protocol, that paper should have been delivered before she showed up so the Chinese would have an idea of what was in it. But no, she didn't do that. And she comes in, and then the first part of it, I understand, was just excoriating the Chinese for being a bunch of human rights abusers and, basically, you're a bunch of sons of bitches. Well, Yang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister,
is Wang Yi.
Wang Yi, he didn't take kindly to that, but he maintained his professional demeanor, but basically, said, Kaya Kallas, you ignorant slut, and began, took her apart. It was not pleasant. So traditionally, the Chinese are not confrontational.
No.
They're not going to get in your face and threaten to punch you. They've tended to be more subtle. Like if you got a trade dispute and they're supposed to send you 10,000 cars, and they can send a message by you only get half that. For the 5,000, say, oh, we had a hurricane, or there was an earthquake, or there was a fire at the factory, and we couldn't produce but we'll get them to you eventually. They can slow roll you. That's sort of the traditional method. But as the aggressiveness of the West and the threats of the West, because it's not just the United States threatening sanctions on China, it's the EU threatening sanctions on China. And China's, the Chinese have not done anything to merit this, despite this, unrelenting propaganda campaign to portray China as this threat to the world that we've got to stop at any cost. And what we're trying to stop is for them having influence in the area, in their own neighborhood. That, I said, that's ours. If China was coming over to tell the United States what it could and couldn't do in the Caribbean, we wouldn't put up with that for a minute. Yet that's what we want to do in the South China Sea. So again, it's this double standard of the attempt to continue and protect Western imperialism.
Larry, do you feel that Japanese and South Korean are somehow the same way that China is? The behavior, the attitude, because Russia protested Japan's participation in U.S. military drills near its borders. We know that Japan is not that much interested in having any sort of conflict with Russia.
Right.
But why would they do that, in your opinion?
Well, you remember NATO tried to have a meeting where both Japan and South Korea were invited to attend. And both of them said, nah, it's okay. Thanks for the invitation, but no, we're not interested. Well, they're sending a message. They understand that, in the neighborhood they live in, that they're going to be better off with having friendly relations with China. Again, it wasn't China in 1934, 35 that invaded Japan. It was Japan that invaded China and killed millions of Chinese, and then forced a number, of Chinese women into prostitution to serve as Japanese soldiers. That's left a scar, a historical memory that doesn't augur for necessarily cordial relations. But China's now become an industrial behemoth and, roared past Japan on that front. I don't think the Japanese are crazy. They're not caught up with the same militaristic vision that was driving them, say, 80, 90 years ago. So, yeah, they're U.S. is, I don't think, is in a position where it can count reliably upon Japan and South Korea ready to jump into a war, particularly with China or Russia.
You mean that they're not going to count on Japan and South Korea if something happens in Taiwan between the United States and China?
Correct. Yeah, I don't think that's guaranteed at all. That's one of the assumptions in the U.S. plan, that they can rely upon South Korea and Japan to be fighting alongside the United States. But those countries realize, we're on the front lines, or we could be damaged. The missiles that could be launched, and the possibility that North Korea would then get engaged on China's behalf, and frankly, Russia, because Russia and Chinese military cooperation has gotten to levels never seen before.
Larry, here is with the case of Epstein. It seems Donald Trump every time and each and every day is getting more desperate, and the way that he's trying to somehow convince his base, those people who voted for him. But as time goes by, it seems that nobody's going to believe him and what he's talking about. Here is Senator John Thune on Fox News talking about the Epstein files.
Leader of the party, and a lot of those constituents out there who are giving voice to wanting to get more information are his supporters. And so, but I think, yes, we're all interested in making sure that we get the justice is served, and that there is full disclosure and there's transparency around this.
So what's in it that Donald Trump is somehow, he tries to fight those people who voted for him, but he's not trying to do anything in terms of just releasing the files and just making everything obvious for the people who are criticizing it?
Jeffrey Epstein was an intelligence asset that worked with both Mossad and the CIA. He was not an employee of either, but he was an asset, somebody used by those organizations to carry out a variety of activities, such as funneling arms to other groups, as well as to get, if you will, compromising information. Now, also, part of Epstein's gig was he managed to get relationships. It looks like he was tied to this owner of Victoria's Secret. That was really his first big billionaire, and apparently started with a homosexual relationship between the two. That's sort of how Epstein became that man's lover, and it was out of that, though, Epstein would then get other billionaires, get compromising information on other billionaires, and that they in turn would give him money. It was sort of an extortion racket. But some of this information was used by the intelligence agencies as well to get pressure all over people. So, but the human trafficking that went on was real. That's why Prince Andrew, made a settlement with the woman that he had sex with, who was underage. That the evidence for this and the ties into the U.S. government are quite clear. There's been pressure that was brought down to prevent. The first time he was prosecuted was here in Florida, and that originated because Epstein was recruiting girls in high school who were underage 14, 15 years old, to, ultimately have sex with him, and then, to bring other girls in. Well, it was prosecuted, but a plea deal was cut with Epstein and his attorneys. That was just unbelievable, because it was not any punishment at all. So here's Donald Trump claiming it's a hoax. And all Trump has done now is he's lit a fire. If you would have gone back, even a year ago, even though people like Dan Bongino and Kash Patel and Donald Trump Jr. were calling about the need, we got to investigate, we need to get all this information out about Epstein, the average person didn't know who he was, didn't care who he was, and particularly the average Trump voter. Or they only knew that he was sort of a symbol of the deep state that needed to be exposed. Trump's reaction and the Trump administration handling of this now has literally created an inferno. It was like the Palisades fire, went through California earlier this year, that just destroyed neighborhood after neighborhood. And all of Trump's attempts to say, hey, nothing to see here, move along, like he's Frank Drebin from that movie Police Story, where the car is crashing, rockets are exploding, the building's blowing up, and he said, nothing to see here, move along. It's having the same effect. So now you've got Candace Owens, she's devoting an Epstein episode every day, bringing out some new dimensions of it. You had Tucker Carlson last night do almost 3 hours with Daryl Cooper. And I would really recommend everybody watch that if they haven't, because it goes into great detail, the linkages to both the intelligence communities as well as the kinds of activities that Epstein was engaged in. And as sort of the conclusion you come away with is what we have going on here is the protection of an international ring of pedophiles, of people who are, it's called, keen on destroying the innocence of children and young women. And it's evil. It is fundamentally evil. And here's Trump protecting that now. So what Trump has succeeded at doing is drawing more attention to this issue. I don't think that was his intention, but that's what he's accomplished. And this is not going away. He's not going to be able to hope that this is just a temporary tempest in a teapot. That this is big, and it's going to continue to linger, and people are going to demand answers. Because the real problem here is that, the first billionaire, Lex Wexner, that Epstein had the relationship with, he's never been subpoenaed, to my knowledge, by any federal authority to explain why he signed over his entire estate to Jeffrey Epstein, a multi-billionaire who takes a guy, and when you look at Epstein's background, you're going to go, what the hell's going on? Because he didn't graduate from college. He didn't have any degree in mathematics or finance. And then all of a sudden, he becomes this extremely wealthy individual who's buying jets and islands and some of the most expensive real estate in the world. And he's doing what? And it was, it was an influence network that had ties to intelligence, and he was able to provide information as well as services. He's implicated in the whole Iran-Contra business, the supplying weapons, and they've been protected. Now, maybe Trump finally, despite all of his previous calls to expose this information, finally got briefed on the real what will be exposed in terms of U.S. intelligence, CIA involvement, and the involvement of Mossad, and it would be very damaging to Israel. So here's, these folks with ties to Israel who've been involved with great, scams, Bernie Madoff and now Epstein. It's the kind of thing they're trying to maybe protect and preserve Israel's reputation. What if it has any left? So yeah, this is a problem. I think you're going to see this story get bigger as we go into August.
Larry, before wrapping up this session, here is what the CEO of Ford Motors said about the competition between the United States and China. It's so amazing to hear what he's describing.
I've ever seen. 70% of all EVs in the world, electric vehicles, are made in China. They have far superior in-vehicle technology. Huawei and Xiaomi are in every car. They have facial recognition.
Cell phone technology.
Yes.
Connected to their cell phone system.
Yes, you get in, you don't have to pair your phone. Automatically, your whole digital life is mirrored in the car. You have an AI companion that you can talk to ChatGPT to all the automatic payment is already there. You can buy movie tickets. It has facial recognition, so it knows who's in which seat and which media you like.
Wait, why don't Ford cars have that? Would you need to deal with Apple or?
Yeah, because Google and Apple decided not to go in the car business. And even beyond that, their cost, their quality of their vehicles is far superior to what I see in the West. I mean, we are in a global competition with China, and it's not just EVs. And if we lose this, we do not have a future, Ford.
What does he mean if we lose this, dude? Based on what you just said, you've lost. They've lost. It is the arrogance of the West. There's no denying that the United States played a dramatic role from the mid 20th century until the start of the 21st century. That we were an economic powerhouse in some aspects, but it was built upon a really false foundation. And China, people say, "Oh, they stole technology." Well, just grow up, be in the big boy world. That happens. What do you think the United States does through the CIA? You don't think we're trying to steal other stuff? Come on. Stop pretending that this is just a one-way street. The Chinese have succeeded in turning their country around in the space of 53 years. When you go back and look at the literacy rates in 1972, you look at where the population was located, you look at the kind of industrial capability they had in 1972 when Nixon went and opened up China, to what it is today. It is, to call it a miracle, it is something that I think is without precedent in history. That it's like the Industrial Revolution on steroids. But I give the head of Ford credit, man. At least he's honest enough to recognize, hey, we're getting our ass kicked.
I hope Lindsey Graham and these people who are they want endless wars would listen to this guy and what's going on. The real fight is what he's talking about.
Well, yeah, and I don't think China is militarily going to take Taiwan. It's their territory. And I think Western efforts to try to hang on to it, to try to control it, are going to collapse from within. I think the West will be in a severe economic crisis within, the next 6 to 12 months. And, at that point, it may be even a global crisis, but it will cripple the West more than it will China. You see some of the, there's a great YouTube channel called Inside China Business by Kevin Wamsley. Yeah, I'm giving him a shout out because the other day in one of his videos he talked about my map. I didn't come up with the map, but the damage that was done by the missiles, Iranian missiles in China. But he does an excellent job of just showing different. You get like a video tour of China. It's phenomenal. Both the beauty, the technology, how modern it is, the innovation that's taking place. This is not the old traditional, stereotype we had of a communist regime where everybody's having to march in order and follow the order of bureaucrats. Somehow they've managed to, the government's managed to create a genuine economic powerhouse. And they built their military up in recent years because of us in the West, because of our threats. And it's like, if we could just back the hell off, and as Rodney King said, can't everybody just get along? Can't we just get along? There are ways to go about this, but the West seems hell-bent on provoking a confrontation.
Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Always good.
You've been shining during the interview with your share. It's amazing.
Yeah, I'll have to get a special lighting next time. Well, we'll see you on Monday. You behave yourself over the weekend.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.